then, members, thank you very much for that honour. I hope I live up to expectations, or if your expectations are bad, I hope I defy them. I'd like to share what Councillor Price said about the service that all members have provided over the past year, and I've certainly enjoyed working with him very much during those 12 months. He's been a solid anchor through stormy seas, and to the extent that seas may be even more stormy ahead, I hope that I am as solid an anchor as he was. Which brings us to the election of the Vice Chairperson. Do I have any nominations, please? Councillor Topping.
So, although it seems slightly unfair on those of us who aren't called Tim, I should like to nominate Councillor Tim Bick to be Vice Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tim Bick has been nominated. Do we have a seconder for Councillor Bick? Councillor Solomon. Yes. Do we have any further nominations for the post of Vice Chair? In that case, I'm delighted to announce that Councillor Vick has been appointed Vice Chairman for the coming municipal year, and I'll invite him to join me at the table. Councillor Price welcomed all the new members to the Assembly, and I'd just like to pass a short reference to those we lost.
Excuse me, Chair, speakers aren't working in this room. We're struggling to hear you.
We know. We're trying to get that fixed.
I'm so sorry. Yes, well, I'm just waffling at the moment. So, in the hope that we get the speakers fixed by the time we come to the real business, that'll be great. Okay, I was just thanking the outgoing council members in particular, Councillor Bridget Smith, Councillor John Williams, Councillor Grenville Chamberlain, Councillor Kevin Coughley and Councillor Dave Bagent. And I'd just like to share with you that Councillor Coughley is not terribly well, and I'm sure all of us would join with me in passing on our best wishes for his recovery.
Agreed.
So I'll try to speak as loudly as I can, but it's going to be a bit ungainly for the members in this half of the room. One of the things I ought to say, therefore, to members who are in this part of the room is that those two little black boxes on the tables in front of you are very sensitive microphones, and they're capable of picking up whispers. So just be careful if you want to say something discreetly to your neighbour, that you're very discreet about it. Are there any apologies for absence, please?
Chairman, we haven't received any apologies.
Thank you. Can I have declarations of interest? And can I just remind members of the Joint Assembly then to declare interest either at the start of the meeting, or if they forget at the start of the meeting, if something comes up during an agenda item that they suddenly realise they ought to have declared an interest, could they declare that interest straight away? I'm so sorry, I thought that Councillor Williams had ceased to be a member, but since he has now turned up, I'll withdraw my thanks to him for his past service, and I welcome him for his continuing service. I'm so sorry, John, my apologies. It's because you hadn't turned up that I thought, I was wondering what might have happened to you. Anyway, right, you're a great member, and I look forward to sparring with you, and indeed sharing our joint interest in getting a decent public transport system for Cambridge and South Cambridge off the card. Thank you. Okay, so that takes us to the minutes of the previous meeting. We have a bit of a doorstop of an agenda, I'm afraid, but we'll get through it as quickly as possible, I hope. So taking the minutes page by page, are there any items on the first page, page 3, 4, 5?
Page 5.
Yes.
Depends which kind. Page 5. On the bottom right-hand side of that page, local transport plan, it picks up the report noted 200,000 additional jobs. I think actually it was 20,000.
Well, we're very ambitious, I think.
Well, we like the ambition.
Yes, we like ambition. I think that may be in a longer time frame, but yes, thank you very much for pointing out that typo. Page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, 10, 11, 12, and I think page 13 is the last one. In that case, I'm taking it, members, that you accept these as a correct record of the previous meeting's discussions. Thank you very much. Right, that takes us into questions from members of the public. We had 10 questions submitted, but following a custom practice, we're taking 9 of those questions because one of them doesn't relate to an item on the agenda today. That question was about Histon Road. The questioner has been informed, and thank you very much for putting the time into putting that question, and we'll make sure that a suitable response is sent by email. I'm going to invite the questioners to ask their questions at the start of each item as we go through the agenda. So these are items 8 on the transport strategy, 10 on Milton Road, and 12 on Greenway. And copies of all the questions submitted are available, and members, you should have them in front of you. That takes us to item 7, which is petitions. We will not be hearing a petition today, although we have received one. It falls between the 50 and 500 signatures threshold, which means that I have to notify the Assembly that we've received that petition, but we don't have to consider it formally today. The petition requests implementation of a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit for the lower part of Histon Road and the nighttime HGV traffic control order. That petition has already also been submitted to Cambridgeshire County Council, the City Council, and Daniel Zeitler MP. And I'd like to thank the residents of Histon Road for presenting that submission. I'm going to move on now to the bulk of the agenda. So we start off with item 8, which is the Greater Cambridge Partnership Transport Strategy. We have one public question on this item, and I know Edward Lee is here, so if I could invite him to come up to the table. And he's a well-rehearsed practitioner at this, so he knows the drill. And Mr. Lee, the course is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. I come to you with knowledge that we now have a delay, or pause to the busway schemes. And I urge you to take this as an opportunity, as a positive opportunity, to really rethink the 10-year strategy. The reasons that the Mayor has required the delay are, I believe, partly justified in that we need a longer-term strategy, a long-term vision that's coherent for the whole region. But there is plenty that can be done in the shorter term. And I urge you to be a lot more ambitious with the cycling and walking policy, because there is a huge potential in connecting up not just villages with the city and employment sites in the city, but linking villages up to each other, linking villages to their local schools and to other local amenities, because this all generates traffic. The vast majority of the traffic on the roads is for short trips, and a lot of that could be shifted to cycling if there were safe, convenient infrastructure. So I urge you to really raise the bar, the ambition for the cycling and walking side of things. But I also want you to focus on much more about what's wrong with the bus services. the bus lanes from Histon and Milton Road, even the officers will acknowledge, is it really going to provide marginal benefit. The real benefit on those two roads is the cycling infrastructure. A short section of bus lane really provides a tiny benefit for a small part of the day. And it won't generate huge modal shift, which is what we really need. And I think I'm right in saying that really on this, the officers are looking to you for leadership, for visionary leadership, to ask them to seek more ambitious ways of achieving this modal shift. And that does mean more restraints in the city centre. It does mean looking at possible ways to raise money to pay for a much expanded public transport network. And it does mean looking at how to work with the operators, Stagecoach, Whippet, and any others that want to take part, in how to build a coherent, integrated network that allows people to commute, get to the shops, get to the vet, get to the doctor's surgery, and not require a car. Because at the moment, for most people in the city and outside the city, most trips require a car. There is not a viable public transport alternative. And it's not just the speed, it is the integration, it's the ticketing, it's the routing. And I've just listed here just some of the things that can be done in a relatively short term. You know, it's about enforcement, it's about better ticketing, it's about looking at how to interchange between services. And I'm not going to read through it all, you can see that. But I just leave you with one thought, which is that we absolutely need to get a proper integration of thought and input into every project. It needs the landscape strategy, it needs an urban design strategy, and it needs people who understand user experience of using a ticket machine, user experience of using buses and switching between different modes of transport. And to include that thinking right from the outset and right through and have constant communication right through each project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You didn't overrun very much either, so I'm very grateful for that. In introducing the report, I think Mr. Blake is going to address some of the points that you may have asked there. So thank you.
Hit the right button. So as a good start. So I just want to sort of briefly introduce the report because I know members will want to get into the conversation. Can you hear me at the back? If I could go up a little.
I'm very sorry, members. I'm informed that the amplifier has died, perhaps keeled over in the hot weather. So we will do our best to speak up for you. I'm very sorry.
Yes, you're very good. We can hear you, so you're great. If they take you out, you'll be very great.
Okay, I'll follow the chair's lead. So just in terms of the report, what it's trying to do is to bring further shape and definition to some of the issues that Edward's raised, but in terms of what the transport strategy and objectives are of the partnership's work going forward. What it is particularly trying to do, and bear in mind this is work in progress, is to say, let us understand in detail what the current and future public transport requirements are for the area, and then let's move into scheme service definition once we've got surety around that. It particularly draw attention, there's two graphs in the paper, and I think if we just focus on that. So paragraph 5.4, and then it goes over the page to paragraph 5.5. Paragraph 5.4 are the growth in traffic projections across the area that are essentially saying, all things being equal, with the planned growth that we've got, and if the modal share stays the same, we're going to get 26,000 more vehicles on our network over the coming period, with all the pressure that will inherently create. And what we need to do is to deliver an attractive, viable public transport network that means it is the travel mode of choice. The second graph just tries to demonstrate what that would mean in terms of patronage numbers. So this isn't a business as usual discussion. This is very much moving from 13 or 14,000 regular passengers to maybe mid-30,000 regular passengers. And what we've got to do is to ensure that we are providing the services and the infrastructure that's required to encourage people to do that. The final point of note is just that we do quite a bit of work, and the work will continue, on what things will encourage people to get out of their car and to move on to public transport. And what it is clearly saying here is that travel time is the determining factor. Travel time and journey reliability are what people want. They want the options to be able to cross the Greater Cambridge area, but they want the certainty that they're going to arrive on time to meet their sort of work, educational or other requirements. I'll hold it there, Chairman.
Right then, I'm sure members, all of us agree that the goal of a comprehensive integrated public transport system is one to which we aspire and which we would like. Sorry, John is smiling at me because he knows how passionate I am about this. So I'll shut up at that point and invite other members of the Assembly to join in the discussion. So. Oh, John wants to do it.
I'll start.
Right then. Thank you very
Apologies
much.
for being late.
You use your mic,
I hope you can hear me at the back. I'll speak as loud as I can. I think what this report shows, that in the short term, and given that we have a crisis now, and a crisis that is going to grow exponentially in the next couple of years, before we can think about mass transit. And the crisis is that we need to get people out of their cars and onto public transport. And that public transport, in the short term, is the bus. We have no alternative here. You know, we have some limited local rail services from places like Waterbridge down into Cambridge and places from Foxton and that sort of thing. But principally, the main public transport infrastructure in this city and in its surrounding area is the bus. And one of the difficulties we have is that the buses are deregulated. And even with the Buses Act, unless the Mayor chooses to go down the road of franchising, and even if we did that, that is years away, because we know that Stagecoach will challenge that in the courts, and we know that you need quite a sizable admin behind it to have a proper developed bus network based on franchising. For the next couple of years, we have got to live with buses that are deregulated. And we have to find some way or other of working with Stagecoach and Whippet and any other bus operator to try and achieve what we want to do here in this report. And one of the things I find is that is a bit light in this report on how we're going to achieve that, how we're going to achieve the integration that we want with a deregulated bus network. So that's my overall view of this report. And the second thing I want to talk about is it does highlight that even if you live in the city and on the immediate fringes of the city, like Cherry Hinton and Fulbourn, journey times by public transport are appalling. It is better to get in your car and drive from Cherry Hinton into the city centre than it is to wait for the City 3 bus. A distance of, 2.5 miles at most? I mean, that is appalling. That is something that we should be utterly ashamed about. And I hope that before we wait until we get demand management charging come in, that given the fact that we have already set a precedent and we are subsidising the park and rides, that we would be prepared to subsidise enhanced bus service from those areas that have already got poor journey times, so that we can start to make that shift from car to public transport. Because if we continue to wait and wait until we have physical infrastructure and demand management charging, I'm afraid things are just going to get worse and worse, and our existing bus services are going to get worse and worse because of the increase in traffic congestion and the problems that we have, as I say, having to work with a deregulated bus network.
Thank you very much. I seen there was a report in the Times a couple of days ago, a recent survey. A report in the Times a couple of days ago on a recent survey which suggested that private cars were in general half an hour faster for commuting than public transport, even in London. And I thought that was a very depressing statistic, and it's obviously one of the things that we need to factor into our activities going forward. I'm going to invite Mr. Blake to reply to some of those points, but I'll hear other members of the Assembly first. So, no. Councillor Gallagher.
Right, thanks. Something very specific, but on page 17, there's a reference there to the very successful guided busway, and there's a reference there under 3.4 that there's an intention to have trials of autonomous vehicles on the busway between the station and Trumpington, which I think it seems to be a good thing to be moving towards. But what concerns me is that currently that route is, from my observations after a visit to the Cambridge assessment site recently, the route is actually getting more and more dangerous because of the success of the number of people cycling and walking alongside the busway. There are no barriers, and there's no fencing there, and there is a huge amount of congregation around the entrance to Cambridge assessment currently, and I'm very fearful of the fact that there could be an accident because of the buses going by at varying speeds. I mean, there is a speed limit, but even with that, there is the danger of pedestrians and cyclists falling into the path of a bus. And what I would like to see done, and I have actually had correspondence with the executive of the county council, the executive director of the economy and environment, and I have been given assurances that there will be another safety audit undertaken. But my fear is that an answer to the queries about safety could be something like that: we can't afford to put fencing up. So I'm asking here if the CGP could put aside funds for making the stretch from the Central Railway Station down to the Trumpington Park and Ride safer, because as we know, Royal Papworth is going to be opening soon. The biomedical campus is now burgeoning, more and more staff going there. So that route is going to get more and more busy with pedestrians and cyclists. So yes, it's good to have autonomous trials, but I think we need to look at the safety along that route beforehand.
I mean, obviously, we're caught by our own success in many ways, because the cycle track along the busway has been hugely successful. But I thought its initial purpose was as an emergency service track, so I'm not sure how fencing works with that. But I think that's something that we'll take away. And as you say, you've already raised it with the Executive Director of Economy, Transport and Environment. I'm going to come to Peter in a minute, but first of all, I've got Councillor Price.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just following on really from Councillor Williams' points, none of which I say I would disagree with. I think every other aspect of pressure groups, if you like the Cambridge Cycling Campaign, who have been really, really effective, long been felt, and I've long felt, and I've said so in this place and others, about bus users, and nobody gets to hear about bus users and their issues and how they feel. And there has recently been formed a bus user group for sort of Cambridge and surrounding area. And I'm hoping that group can be as successful as the Cambridge Cycling Campaign, that they can join in with telling us, their experiences of the bus service in this city, which is not great. We also have the issue of the Mayor of the Combined Authority, who is not in favour of buses, and somehow he has to be persuaded that there is somewhere for buses, and they have to form a part of everything that happens in the Greater Cambridge area. He said throughout his election campaign how people didn't use buses. I think what he meant was he doesn't use buses, therefore, because he clearly thinks nobody else does. So I look forward to some input into this, hopefully from the bus user group, so that there is actually other pressures on us.
Thank you very much, and I certainly welcome the formation of that bus users group as well. And Councillor Topping.
Thank you, Chair. My point is that I think that in the short term, making more effective use of buses is probably essential. But one of the things that I would expect us to do is to look further into the future, and not just on the concept of autonomous vehicles, but on the concept of mobility as a service, which is, as I'm sure most people know, is about making use of IT systems that can, in a sense, turn the bus route into the best way of collecting the most people on a particular journey, and using both private and public sector funded bus services. And in particular, down in the south of South Cambridgeshire, where we have some very large science hubs who are currently spending nearly £1 million a year on providing travel simply from a rail station 2 or 3 miles to the science hub. And I know that those companies would very much like to work with the bus companies and ourselves in trying to develop this mobility as a service concept that would enable the public to make better use of the bus services that they're running for their staff. And it seems to me that those are the sorts of things that we ought to be having an aspiration to develop, as well as recognising that bus use in the short term is probably a very important part of our strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Topping welcomed the setting up of the bus users group, but he said we ought to be looking a bit further forward than just things like autonomous vehicles running on the busway, and looking to explore how we can work, particularly with our southeast science parks, in developing mobility as a service to make best use of public and private vehicles along any particular route. So he urged us to work closely with private sector partners in elaborating that idea. Thank you, Councillor Topping. Mr. Wilkins, not Walkinshaw.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on Mr. Lee's comments about ambition. It's really important, as a point I've made before. This is about a very large number of people who need to access our city, and they're willing to increase hugely over the coming 10 years or so. So I welcome the report, and I think there's a lot of good stuff in here. One thing that is missing is the reference to, we talk about an integrated plan. It doesn't recognise that cars are also part of that, especially outside the city centre, and the opportunity to interchange between the car and other forms of transport, which becomes really important. So we need to be able to access it. I don't think there's enough of that picked up in this report, but otherwise a great report. I understand the numbers.
Right then, a very valuable point. Councillor Bick.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to welcome this report. I mean, the report is asking us to comment on progress, and so I can divide that into 2 parts. I think it's been too slow up till now to get to this point, but I think if we follow this direction, then we're following the right direction. The thing that I think that this marks is a welcome departure from believing that the transport challenge is all about infrastructure schemes and capital projects, and not much about services. And services, in the end, are what people get. And I think that clearly our eventual solution is going to be a blend of both of those things, but we have underplayed the role of services in where we're needing to get to. A minor point I wanted to make, there is a suggestion in here that we're primarily talking about weekday commuter travel, and I wanted to make the sort of soft suggestion that we should also be talking about weekend travel as well. This is just as much a part of the local economy as weekday travel, but it's a different concept, and we see just as much congestion in that process as we do on weekdays. It's just different, and I think it ought to be factored in to the same equation. My question is to Peter Blake, is having got to this point, which to me sets a good direction, what does he envisage is the next step to take it forward? It's a little bit what Councillor Williams was asking. How do we actually engage to make sure we address the delta between bus capacity that is needed in future versus where we are today? And we're talking, I think if I read this correctly, about having a bus network which is 3 times more able to meet the need than it does today.
And before you answer that, I just have Helen at the back there. Oh, no, I also have yes, sorry, yes. Oh, right, oh, right, everyone's jumping in now. Helen, yeah.
Okay, well, I welcome the report. I think the graphs on page 19 and 20 are alarming. I mean, we have seen them before, but it is kind of stark, the percentage increase in traffic that we're expecting. I guess for me that reinforces that in the longer term, CAM or something like it is the only solution. I can't see us resolving the problem just with bus and cycling changes. In the short term, though, I think, like others have said, we do need to see what changes we can make that will at least to some extent not resolve the problems, but reduce the problems, because as things stand here, things are going to get very much worse before they start to get better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to very much welcome this report. It is a dangerous sense that there is some strategic thinking emerging from the weeds here. And I think I've made a point on those lines before. So I really welcome it. I think getting the clarity of, which I see as a fresh approach here, is the concept that public transport is in competition with a private car, so let's look at what are the drivers, what makes it competitive. There may be ways of forcing people to use public transport, but if we can work out how we can make people want to use public transport, that's got to be, a preferred solution. So that the idea of journey times, I found the maps on page 22 and 23 both interesting and alarming at the same time. It appears to take about half an hour to get from one side of Trumpington to the environmental campus, if I'm reading the map correctly, which is absurd, of course. And I think the analysis that it starts to bring, and I accept this as a first step, but the analysis it starts to bring in terms of distinction about, are we trying to reduce journey time, or do we need to concentrate on how you get people to the starting point of their public transport journey more effectively? Starting to get clarity on those, I think, is key to getting efficiency of investment, because if we put the money into the wrong thing, which may have been lots of infrastructure, we may end up without delivering results. So I think the clarity of analysis that I see starting here is extremely welcome.
And Councillor Massey.
Thank you. I was interested to see in the report on point 8.4 that one of the issues that we need to address is reducing the financial cost of public transport. I just want to reinforce that. Currently, our public transport options are inaffordable for the regular user, and we need to future-proof and make sure that any transport plans coming forward are affordable for all users, including people on low incomes. At the moment, for an adult and a child, just to go from Cambridge City to Arbury and back again, it's £7.80, which is basically £10. If you are not working on a low income, that is not affordable, and therefore your only option, and the cheaper option, simply is to get in a car. And we need to change that. And if we can address that, then more people are more likely to use the bus services, because it will be the cheaper option and the better option.
Thank you very much. Oh, yes, Councillor Sullivan.
So, like everybody else, I would welcome this report. The one thing that I feel is missing in is a broader context, actually. It's very good at providing a context of Cambridge and Greater Cambridgeshire. But is there an external context of case studies from other parts of the world, other areas similar to Cambridge that have tried to execute this kind of modal shift? Just to quantify the scale of the challenge in a global context, maybe we are the only people that are attempting this, but it feels that it's missing what lessons there are to learn from elsewhere. The other thing that I would like to add in terms of in the implication section, the 9.1 first point there, is around, this is going to take a mix, and the challenge is clearly going to be finding what the right mix is. I just wonder what thoughts have gone into different strategic themes, you might call them, in terms of alternatives within that mix of where is the focus. I would just be interested to hear what Peter's thoughts are on that.
Right then, Councillor Wilson.
The report, can you hear me?
Put it down.
The scale of the challenge. I've noticed it refers several times to workers and employees, but there's no mention here of sixth form students. In the village where I live, there are we don't have a standard sixth form, and the teenagers from the village all travel into Hills Road, Long Road, and many of them, as soon as they reach the age of 17, take their driving test and then drive in and park around Long Road. So this needs to be taken into account as well, especially as our bus service has deteriorated in that the bus no longer goes that far and they have to change buses in the centre of town, adding an hour to each end of their day at least when they're studying quite hard for A-levels.
Yes, I was just puzzled because there may not have been a reference to teenagers, but I'm sure I saw a reference to sixth form colleges somewhere, either in this paper or it's the one after this one. But yes, it's a point we're very much alive to, but Mr. Blake will address it. Oh, no, you've already had one shot, but I'll give you another one. Very briefly, please. Yes.
Are we restricted?
Yes. Oh, mostly speaking, yes. Well, only because I wanted to drive the agenda through.
Well, I think it's an opportune thing, because yeah, it's very opportune, because it is great to have this emphasis on public transport, buses in particular, and so forth, particularly the cost. But talking about cost, as we know, one of the cheapest ways to get around is on a bicycle. And I was just looking at page 26 here, paragraph 10.2, and I think a kind of subliminal typo here. If you see the last reference there to paragraph 4.4, there might be me not navigating this big document incorrectly, but when I go back to 4.4 as I see it on page 18, it's, as I say, it's a reminder of just how central to the lives of people in Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire cycling is, because you'll see there, commuters make up the highest proportion of those travelling, and it says 47.7% of commuters cycle compared to 38.7% of the others. So I think that someone has made a slight error there, but behind it all is they've in the sense of finishing the report by drawing us back to this very important cycling statistic. And yes, we are doing a great amount for cycling, but I think we can do a lot more. I mean, the geography of this area is ideal for cycling, and I think the vision, as we've been told again and again, is to aim to have a cycling network which is similar to that in the Netherlands and Denmark. And in many ways, there's no reason why not, because you can see from this statistic here that people are already cycling in great numbers, and I guarantee you more and more will take to cycling. When cycling is made safer and there's more comprehensive network of segregated cycle routes and safer junctions.
As the County Council and the cycling champion, Councillor Gallagher, we would absolutely expect you to highlight the value of cycling, and of course as a passionate cyclist myself, I completely endorse everything you say. And yes, isn't it fantastic that 47.7% of commuters go by bicycle, and 38.7% of all travellers into and out of Cambridge go by bicycle, and roll on the tipping point when both of those figures are over 50%. On the 4.4, I think the problem has been identified. It should have been a reference to paragraph 3.4, where you have a whole list of transport schemes laid out there. Does anyone else want to throw anything into this discussion? No? Okay. Mr. Blake, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to do my level best to respond to the points that have been raised. So in terms of starting with Councillor Williams, there is no single answer here. Emphasise the point at the very end about cycling. That is key. This paper is focusing on the public transport requirements as they go forward. What we've tried to do in paragraph 3.4 is to say, this is what we're already doing, but we recognise, and I think Helen picked up on the graphs, when you look at the graphs, we're actually going to have to do what we're currently doing and then more. So this is very much, how do we start and paint a picture and come up with a deliverable plan for larger scale interventions in our area. Councillor Price, I think, rightly makes the point that the bus is going to be with us in some form going forward, and so needs to be part of our plans. More people travel in London by bus every day than they do on the tube. So what we want to do is work with partners, combined authority and others to deliver the metro system, but the metro system will not cover all of our area. We need to make sure that the bus is as attractive as possible, and cycling and the other modes are as well. So that's the picture where we're almost sort of trying to paint here. I'll speak to the county separately, Councillor Kavanagh, about the busway issues that you've raised. Talking about alternatives, I think Councillor Topping rightly raises the issue of mobility as a service, and I can reassure members that my colleague Noel Godfrey is doing work on that under the SMART theme. Again, this will sit alongside, it might not be mass transit and lots of people, but will be an important part of the network going forward. I think interchange, Christopher, should be in there, and we will need to get there, because as much as we might like to just look at our little world in Greater Cambridge, there's an awful lot of people who want to come, as is evidenced by the music and the crowds outside. So we need to make sure that we can best avail that in a way that supports our economy and our communities, rather than has a sort of negative impact. So I would see that very much as being the sort of next steps, which hopefully is a nice segue into sort of Councillor Bick's question around what is the next step. So the idea here is to say, let's recognise some of the facts and figures in terms of the growth. One of the issues I didn't pick up on is actually what this paper tells us is the public transport network needs to change quite markedly, not just in terms of size, but actually at the moment it focuses on the city centre. And if you look at jobs and you look at our communities, actually an awful lot of people don't want to go to the city centre. We will always need that, and we need to protect that, but we need to make sure people can get to the biomedical campus or can get to West Cambridge or these other areas. So what we have to start and do from this is to say, let's begin to design the service that we think we need. That is going to throw up a whole host of issues. It's going to throw up an issue where we've demonstrated through our case studies analysis that we're on fairly solid ground with our proposals. But we're going to say, how can we afford it? This is very much around services, not around building things. Building things will be important because what the evidence is telling us is journey times are important and people don't want to get stuck in queues, but we need to build the services and develop the services people can have confidence in. So we need to pick up on how will we pay for it? Who will operate it? We have a current regulatory framework. The Combined Authority has just kicked off their piece of work around the bus review, which will report by the end of the year, which we will be putting this information into to say, you need to tell us how we can, that your work can support changes that are required in the Greater Cambridge area. So we really need to break this down into saying, we're clearer now in terms of what the journey patterns and services should look like, and we need to start saying these are the business case elements for how we ultimately go about delivering that. I think again, Helen Valentine's point on short and longer term, we've absolutely got to we've got to nail. The clarity, and I think John Wells' point around the thinking that has to drive our future interventions, because some of this isn't going to be cheap, and we're going to need to make a sort of demonstrable case for that. I hope I picked everything. Cost and fares will need to be a consideration. The information at the moment is actually it's not the driver for commuters. Okay, that's great. And commuters might drive some of the peak time journeys, i.e. the size and scale of the network, but we need to make sure that we're catering for our sixth form students, our people who are coming in off peak. And there probably needs to be a slightly different both pattern and service offer, including cost, to reflect that. So, as I said at the start, this is work in progress, but what we need to do is to use this to size and shape the key components of our requirements going forward.
Right then, members, I think there was broad agreement on welcoming the paper, sticking to the public transport requirements title given, setting aside how valuable active modes, walking and cycling are. This paper was focusing on the public transport requirements, and I can't help drawing attention to Mr. Blake's reference to how many people use London buses, and indeed that more people use buses in London than use the tube. Of course, London has a franchise bus system, and it costs between 500 million and 600 million pounds a year to keep that bus service running. Now, if you take the population of Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire as a proportion of the population of Greater London, you come up with a figure of about 1/30th, which suggests, as a first approximation, I think, that we ought to be spending something like £20 million a year on a bus service for Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire. So given the fact that we don't have a franchised system and the difficulties that Councillor Williams outlined of getting there, let's see what sort of appetite there is for generating that sort of revenue to support that level of bus service. I'd better move on, otherwise I'll get into terrible trouble for going down that line. Right then, moving on to item 9. Now then, you won't find item 9 in your agenda, members. That's because the paper on the A428 Camborne to Cambridge scheme has been withdrawn from the agenda. That is as requested by the Mayor's interim transport statement, and that statement was agreed by the Combined Authority at a meeting on the 30th of May, and in deference to that declaration, we have decided to postpone that item until the October meeting.